Hello, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Center. We have a really exciting climate chat starting right now with Molly Hellmuth from Winrock International. Molly is the lead author of the international chapter of the 5th National Climate Assessment, which just came out just a few weeks ago, and she's going to tell us all about it.
Is it on? Okay, good. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm Molly Hellmuth, and at Winrock, I lead out on climate, and I've been working on climate change and development for 25 years. My co-presenter, Farhan, is running. He may not make it, actually. He's running late. But he is the coordinating lead author for the international chapter. We work closely together. He leads the climate science team at the U.S. Department of State. And he's been involved in climate negotiations for 10 years, and most recently co-facilitated the technical dialogue of the global stocktake. So he's been very busy here with negotiations. Before I move on and get into some of the details of the international chapter, I just wanted to recognize the strong contributions and the strong author team and contributors. We had 9 authors from a mix of government, academic, private sector, and non-government organizations, which really brought a diversity of perspectives. And so I think that really strengthened our chapter considerably to have those different types of insights. So I thought I would start out with a kind of high-level introduction of what the U.S. National Climate Assessment is, for those of you who are not familiar with it. Again, it was just released 3 weeks ago, but it's the development of the National Climate Assessment is part of the mandate of the U.S. Global Change Research Program. You can see the logos of the 14 U.S. agencies that are part of the U.S. GCRP. And the mandate is to assist the U.S. and the world to understand, assess, and predict and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. The 5th National Climate Assessment evaluates a wide range of scientific and technical inputs from a diverse and authoritative sources, similar to the IPCC, but very much focused on the U.S. Context. And we also look at a range of potential impacts, and the idea is to help decision makers better identify risks that could be avoided or reduced. For the international chapter in particular, we reviewed the evidence base over the past 5 years. The idea is that the chapters would be updated every 5 years with new information. We looked at both the physical and transition risks. So the last international chapter was really focused on physical risks and did not include climate change mitigation in a very real way. And we looked at the pace of response. Hello, Farhan. Welcome. So we looked at the pace of response relative to the pace of impact to understand progress to date, but also to look at the implications for the future. And the chapter underwent 6 formal review processes, which took over 2 years for us to get through. It's also a very unique chapter in terms of considering the impacts that occur outside of the U.S. and the implications of those impacts on U.S. national interests. So that's different than the rest of the National Climate Assessment. So we have a kind of long and storied history of the National Climate Assessment starting in 2001. So, over 20 years ago, and again, these take a couple of years to produce, but it really has evolved considerably over that time frame. The mandate that the U.S. GCRP has is for these to be quadrennial reports, so they're supposed to come out every 4 years. You can see that hasn't quite been the case. In terms of the international chapter, that was first included in the 4th National Climate Assessment, and so it's a relatively new focus for a U.S. national climate assessment, and I think part of that is the recognition of the significant importance of impacts that occur outside of the U.S. to U.S. national interests. So, again, relatively new, and sort of fits with the trajectory of the National Climate Assessment history. For the 5th National Climate Assessment, which just came out, there were 2 new chapters that had more focus on social sciences. So social sciences and justice, I think it was called, and then economics. So getting to the four key messages from the international chapter, Farhan and I are going to dive into those in more detail, but just to say that we identified 3 priority U.S. national interests: national security, economics, trade and investments, and sustainable development. We have a very limited space, 5,000 words, to pull together the key messages, and it's a lot of wordsmithing and a lot of negotiation as to, what goes in and, what we want to prioritize given changes over the last 5 years. So the first key message is focused on the interdependent nature of not only the U.S. national interests, but globally of our systems. And so I'll jump in to describe that in a little bit more detail. So for this is one of the first key messages, and as I mentioned, it really focuses in on the globally interdependent systems, economic, social, natural, physical, and how they can amplify risks to U.S. interests. And this can lead to reducing local and global stability, disrupting livelihoods and economic growth. And we actually provide several examples of how that can play out. But just in terms of this figure in particular, you see the 3 U.S. national interests in the middle: national security, economics, trade and investment, and sustainable development. You see the broad range of, honestly, this looks super complicated to me now, and it took us very long to get it to be have more clarity. But you can look at sort of how climate stressors and non-climate stressors and the level of adaptive capacity can come together and present risks and opportunities within those 3 areas, but also at how our responses, how we respond, can also have both positive and negative impacts on U.S. interests and also pose, I'd say, opportunities as well. So part of the national climate assessment is, especially as it's sort of housed within the broader, the international chapter is housed within the broader national climate assessment, is to demonstrate how it's within U.S. interests to promote sustainable development, to promote climate mitigation, to promote climate adaptation globally. So that's part of what the international chapter achieves. A couple of the examples that we give in for this are just looking at the combination of drought in Central America and other impacts in Central America can disrupt livelihoods, health and food security, taken in combination with conflict, has really fueled unprecedented migration to the southern border of the U.S. We also look at the link between drought impacts in the North America, the Horn of Africa, poor harvests in France, in China, and the war in Ukraine, and kind of look at how that has increased the fertilizer costs and commodity prices and food prices and increased food insecurity and undermines sustainable development. I'm going to hand it over to Farhan to talk about the next 3 key messages.
Thank you, Molly, and I apologize for being a little bit late, trying to run across the center to be here in time. So Molly has given you the overview of sort of the nature of the chapter and why we really developed it as we did. And I thought I'd step you through some of the more the substantive key points in our chapter, trying to give you a flavor for the information that's in there. Of course, please read the whole chapter. It's not very long, only 5,000 words. And it does have a wide variety of both information within the chapter as well as really important links and sources where you can go and get a lot more information about all the topics we assess. So on the second key message, we systematically assess the way that climate change contributes to political and social instability around the world and over the coming decades. As one example, we do look at here in this figure how U.S. reliance on imports for minerals for the transition to renewable energies may have implications on U.S. security policy. and energy security. And so we look at how there could be unintended consequences of how our climate actions develop to rely on minerals that are being imported from other parts of the world, and how those sources are essential to our transition. We also look at how these materials or minerals are collected, and how that could pose risks to stability across our presence around the world, and also just generally how climate change could impact our presence around the world across diplomatic, development, and defense sectors. And we highlight a number of partnerships and other programs that the U.S. government is pursuing to address those risks. So the next message on economic trade and investments really does get at some of the things that Molly was just highlighting in terms of how climate change impacts across around the world expose U.S. interests, economic, trade, and investment interests to risks, and how those can be resolved through investments in regulatory and market frameworks and financing that can allow for the enabling conditions to promote transitions that can protect our interests overseas. This is something that we note in the chapter, specifically, things like the commitments that were made in between 2020 and 2021, that where the companies worldwide committed to reaching net zero by 2050 went from 30 to 450, and so we note these sorts of trends. And also discuss their implications on U.S. interests at home and abroad. We also go through and look at some of the risks and market opportunities for investments that can drive private investment in adaptation. We look at tracked private sector adaptation flow or adaptation investment flows, and how institutional investors are now developing frameworks to promote those flows. And then our final key message looks at sustainable development and sort of how we're seeing climate change impact the world, and how that can, how the U.S. can help protect the most vulnerable around the world to both, help their own impacts around in other countries, but also be really important for U.S. interests as well. We find, that overall, as many assessments have, that mitigation benefits are vastly expected to exceed costs, and that that doesn't, even if we don't know the full accounting of the avoided losses and the costs associated with reducing potential climate change, the reduced needs for adaptation and the co-benefits will be much higher than those of the costs associated with mitigation. We also come up with several really important findings on adaptation, noting that adaptation investments can be affordable with, again, benefits that far exceed their costs. We look at some estimates that range from $2 to $13 of returns for every $1 invested in adaptation. And some of those higher returns are associated with investments in infrastructure resilience, early warning and response, and disaster risk management. We also look at sort of what aspects of adaptation around the world is leading to better outcomes. So, increasing coherence and coordination amongst humanitarian, peace building, and resilience building and development actions can help to address convergent risks and opportunities. We also look at inclusive governance and the role that locally led and collaboratively developed responses can do to strengthen potential enabling conditions for adaptation. So again, these are very high level sort of summaries of these chapters, and certainly please go and look at the full text of the chapter. So finally, just to wrap up, also just from my perspective, so I also sit on the steering committee for the USGCRP, which is the Global Change Research Program that looks at coordinating global change research across the federal government. And one of the key aspects of that work is to facilitate international research coordination. And part of that is the U.S. government support for scientists to participate in the IPCC process, and also to develop the tools to be able to use the National Climate Assessment both domestically and internationally. And I think the value of the National Climate Assessment as we see it in the U.S. is that, by developing such a robust assessment of climate change across the U.S., it does inform both, national government actions as well as subnational government actions. It does provide a regular check-in to progress being made domestically, and does inform our work internationally as well, as part of as this international chapter illustrates. Just to highlight that, we are also working as part of this mandate to help with international climate change research. There are programs like in Latin America, for example, where we have partnered with others to sort of develop risk assessment capacity, very much based on our experiences with the National Climate Assessment. And we have pilots in Jamaica, El Salvador, in indigenous communities in Amazonia, as well as an overall region-wide observatory system that we're trying to work with. So happy to provide more details on that effort as well, but we are trying to expand the experiences that we've had with the National Climate Assessment across the globe. So thank you all. Yeah.
So that concludes the presentation, but we'll open it up for questions.
Hi, I'm Alex Newman with the New American Magazine. As you know, there's been some criticism in the press of this climate assessment report for, in part, relying on experts from politicized environmental groups. One of the groups involved was the Environmental Defense Fund, which was receiving funds from the Sea Change Foundation, which, according to congressional investigators, was getting Russian money and oil money through a shell company in Bermuda called Klein Limited. Why did you guys bring these people into the report?
Thank you. I'm not familiar with the specific issue that you're raising. I think it is an important process where we do bring in authors and perspectives from across a wide range of experts, and I think it is an important aspect of the overall process to develop this report.
Any additional questions?
No questions? Someone's got to have a question. This is COP. Everyone's got questions.
Thanks so much. I really appreciated the presentation. I'm Jay Family, hydrologist professor at Arizona State University. The slide that really captured my attention there was the one on the outsourcing of mining for tech minerals. And I was just wondering to what degree you've looked at the water requirements and the degree to which, for that sort of mining, and the degree to which that's going to be a problem within the U.S. and around the world.
For this particular context, no. With the 5,000 word limit, it was very high level, so water could come underneath that environmental impact umbrella. But yeah, we did reference the social and environmental, as well as the sort of economic and geopolitical impacts that this will have on U.S. national security and economic trade and investment. But that is I would just say in general, with 5,000 word count and the 6 levels of review that we went through, there was a lot of interest that came in. Water, actually, in the 4th national climate assessment, and probably just I'm thinking of this because you're from Arizona State, was one of the bigger focus areas. So looking at transboundary water in particular with Mexico and the U.S. and I think even Canada. So we tried to bring in a new dimension. Transboundary risk for us was really global, as opposed to sort of a bilateral.
I have one question actually from the back, because I get to ask questions too as MC. I was curious about, from your perspective, focusing on this topic from an international standpoint, what was one thing that came out in this chapter and creating this chapter that surprised you, or that you found was pretty interesting that you weren't expecting going in?
I'm thinking. I think, if I'm being honest, there weren't a lot of surprises to me. Things are kind of moving quickly, and in part we had COVID, which really demonstrated the interconnected nature of our supply chains and economics. And so we had just been through this, still going through a little bit, this massive upheaval in terms of the impacts that COVID could have on the U.S. economy, even if it was, it was also occurring in the U.S., but just in terms of the international impact. So I think in terms of a new key message, not necessarily a surprise, we did try to elevate that interconnected and interdependent nature and the amplification of that on U.S. national interests as a core major theme.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's similar to Molly. There's not a whole lot of super surprising outcomes from the report, but I think one of the challenges I think we faced was the rapidly developing or changing context in which this international system is working on. And I think, we note in the report where, there's significant changes year to year, and as we, undertook a 2 or 3 year process to draft the chapter, things kept coming out that we needed to edit and update as we got more information. So I think that was one of the challenges I think addressed in writing this chapter, is to capture sort of the latest information as we're going through the review process and more information was coming out.
One more time for questions right here.
Thank you so much. Hi, so Patrick Tonneson from the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. So we're North America, as you may know. One of the slides I really liked the most was that about opportunities, especially as one of the younger members of the audience here too. I wonder if you can speak to some of the leverage points we have actually here just to seize those opportunities, and what do you think might be some of the most important ones? Thank you.
So, I think there's a lot of opportunities ongoing right now with, obviously energy has been a space where there's been a lot of opportunities for a long time, and we're speaking about private sector here. In particular, there are a broad range of, I'd say, innovative and new financial instruments that are being put out, whether it be green bonds or blended finance or things to de-risk investments, to crowd in the private sector. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity both in terms of mitigation technology but also adaptation technology, and there are regulations and that are kind of underpinning that. Even with the IRA, which is domestically focused, the opportunities there for innovating can translate into international opportunities for U.S. businesses.
Yeah, I think you covered it. I think that we try to do in the chapter was catalog and capture a lot of the information that's out there now about the emerging opportunities and how U.S. firms are investing around the world, and some of the risks they face and some of the opportunities that they face around the world, and try to do an even-handed assessment of what those look like around the world.
All right, we're actually running up against the next event that's coming up in just a few minutes, so we're going to have to cut this short. Can we give both our speakers a round of applause?